In this video, I'm going to arm you, the public forum debater, with arguments not found elsewhere. If you're debating the September and October public forum resolution, namely, the federal government should enact the Medicare for All Act, then you need to listen to what I have to say. You will have the element of surprise, and you will learn vital, important things about U.S. public policy that you haven't heard before. Hello, I'm Dr. Joseph Arminio, Senior Instructor here at Statesman Debate Institute. I believe that this Medicare for All public forum resolution is a problematical choice. Now, that's not what my colleagues will tell you. All or most other debate coaches will tell you that this is a balanced resolution. Balanced, really? Doesn't it tilt toward the negative? You'll see why I think that's the case in a few minutes. What my colleagues offer you, I would characterize as conventional topic analyses. What the Institute offers you, and what I'm going to specifically offer you in this video, is classical topic analysis. There's a world of difference between the conventional and the classically based approaches, as you're going to find out. Now, before we go any further with the video, I urge you to support the important work of Statesman Debate Institute, and you can see the subscription button and notification bell here in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. We are substantially enhancing student speech and debate in this country. We're worthy of your support. We need it. Support us, help yourself, and do something good for the country. As I see it, the conventional topic analyses of the public forum Medicare for All resolution suffer from two big deficiencies. The first deficiency, they're not thorough enough within the very parameters that they confine themselves to. And that takes me to two related deficiencies. They're not dealing with the relevant religious liberty argument to the extent that they should, and I think they're also saying nothing about the relevant mental health argument. It could well be that the Medicare for All Act will result in the establishment of a mental health screening system. And then the other deficiency, which is much, much bigger than these others, I think, is that the other topic analyses neglect a powerful, true third-way solution to the healthcare problem in this country, a solution called distributism. Distributism has nothing to do with socialism or communism, though you might think so by the title. Indeed, it has medieval European roots, yet is of tremendous relevance, I would argue, for 21st century America. Well, thus far, the introduction to this video. At this point, I want to tell you what lays ahead, give you, in a sense, a table of contents. So right now, we're at about the 3-minute mark, and for the next 13 minutes or so, I'm going to revisit the conventional topic analyses of this Medicare resolution. In particular, stress what they get right. They get a lot right, and I'm going to enhance what they get right, bringing into play classically based critical thinking technique. I think you're going to learn a number of important things in the next 13 minutes. Then, at the 16-minute mark and going on for about 4 minutes, I'm going to have a look at this religious liberty argument. I think you're going to learn something new there. Then, for about 10 minutes, we're going to look at an argument probably not heard anywhere else on the public forum circuit. Specifically, if this Medicare for All Act is enacted, you're going to see, in all likelihood, the establishment of a nationwide mental health screening system with all that that entails. At the 30-minute mark, we're then going to take a look at distributism and its application to the healthcare problem. And this will, in all likelihood, be quite new to you, and I think quite useful, serving you well as a debater and for the rest of your life. Then, for a few minutes, I introduce you to a concept called the mountaintop. And by introducing that concept, it also gives me the opportunity to provide a summary of what we've learned in this video. And then at the very end, I share Statesman Debate Institute's academic year classically based programs. So there's a lot new here and a lot worth listening to. I would like to accomplish several things at this point in the briefing. So you see here on this slide that I'm going to be talking about what the conventional topical analyses tend to get right, and they get a lot right. I've got a question about what they're doing, and down here I'm very definitely concerned. In fact, I'm sure they're not. I'm sure they're off on the wrong foot. So let's go back and take a closer look at these things. Conventional topic analysis is mostly doing good, especially within its self-imposed limits. And I'm going to be saying more about these self-imposed limits. That is, it's working off of certain assumptions. I'll be saying more about this later in this briefing. So if we look even closer, what we see is that conventional topical analysis is rightly pointing out problems with the present healthcare system, and they are big problems. Look at the cost. No other country on earth is paying what we're paying, public and private healthcare expenses combined. We are spending $3.5 trillion per year, or about 17% of our gross domestic product. This is twice what we were paying as a share of gross domestic product compared to 50 years ago. If we keep on this rate, if we keep at this pace, we'll be bankrupt. We can't afford it to go on much longer at this pace. We're also getting the worst of both worlds in a sense. We're spending more than anybody else, and yet we're not covering everyone. Other countries are spending less and covering everyone. These are definite problems. We have more detailed problems, administrative burden, too much paperwork, corruption, unnecessary billing, and so forth, prescribing of unnecessary tests and procedures, and on we can go. Now, what about strengths of the present system? Well, I think the conventional topic analysis is doing some good work here too. If you're over 65, it's a pretty good system. If you can afford this, if you can afford to pay, it's tremendous. You're seen quickly. It's the best treatment on earth. Top technology, top medical practitioners, top hospitals, other facilities, top pharmaceuticals, typically. All these are great strengths of the system. And of course, a lot of this is private industry at work, the private market, the free market at work. Now, conventional topical analysis also has something to say, important things to say about economic advantages and disadvantages of the alternative Medicare for all single-payer system. So they're giving us something to work with if you're the affirmative, and of course they're giving you something to work with if you're the negative. So one thing, of course, we see is that with the Medicare for All Act alternative, that everyone is covered. And not only that, we fulfilled a basic human right that all people deserve to have health care coverage. These are tremendously important. Something else which Senator Bernie Sanders, the principal sponsor of this alternative legislation, has pointed out, that is, we're not just going to heavily fund and cover traditional Western-based medical solutions, but also non-traditional alternatives, what some call naturopath solutions. This is a very big point. There'll be less administrative burden, less paperwork. A physician is less inclined to retire early, overwhelmed is he by all the bureaucracy and all the bureaucratic red tape. These are all advantages of the system. But there are disadvantages, though. We're going to drive private industry out. There may be longer wait times. Specialities may go by the wayside, and so forth. And now we get down to the big question, what about cost? When we look at cost of the alternative system, remember we're spending right now 17% of GDP, and you look at the estimates, and here's where I have a problem with this debate resolution, but if you look at the estimates, you see that the mainstream estimates tend to show, here's the symbol delta, no change, tend to say that we're going to spend about the same as a society. We're presently spending public and private combined about $3.5 trillion a year. We're going to spend about that amount, though it'll be government funded, over the next 10 years, about as much, no change. Now, there are some estimates, though, that go to the extremes. And by that, I don't mean that saying that they're going to the extreme, that they're less credible. I'm just saying that there are some estimates that put the cost of the alternative Medicare for all system at 2/3 more than we're spending. And there's some estimates that put it at 1/2 of what we're spending. So what are you to do with these estimates? Do you have the time to burrow into the metrics, into the mathematical models, into all the assumptions that go into all these estimates? Probably not. I doubt you have. So what are you to do? If you come to me, the judge, here's the risk that you're going to be facing offsetting expertise. If you come to me as the judge and you quote some particular expert, say over here, who says half the cost, and then you quote some other expert over here that said, no, it's going to be half again as much than the present system, who am I to believe? If you both quote opposing sources and very different estimates, what am I to do? So what you need to do is find a way to substantiate why your expert is more believable than the opponent's expert. And that's not easy to do, but to do that, you're going to need to bring to bear analytical rigor. And I'm going to have more to say about that in just a moment. Now, there's something I want to also mention about how conventional topical analysis is doing something quite good indeed. And that is promoting lateral thinking. What we're seeing now, and it's been a long time coming, I wish we'd seen this in prior debates, maybe this is going to set a new trend. What we're seeing now is a push, encouraging all of you debaters to think laterally, to put your quantifications, to put your estimates in a broader numerical quantified context. So in other words, if you give me the estimate, the cost of the system, you should put that in the context of the federal budget as a whole. And that in turn, in terms of the US economy as a whole. We haven't seen this much of this effort to put things in context in prior debates. We're seeing it now. This is a good thing indeed. Now this comes back again to the question of what about substantiating one estimate versus another? Or how about substantiating the net benefits of single payer versus the present system? How do you go about that? Well, I wonder now if the conventional topical analysis is doing enough of this, which is encouraging all of you to be analytical. And that means in particular to look at the whole and the parts of the problem. So here I'm drawing this matrix, and you should, when you're doing your research, you should be generating a lot of matrices, or at least 4, 5, 6 matrices. This is a matrix now of principal variables vis-a-vis the present US system and the proposed alternative US system. So this would be people over 65 in this top row, and these would be people below 65. And here would be, in this column, the poor and the middle class and the rich. And I would be also interested in the speed of delivery, especially the speed of delivery compared to, say, acute disease and routine disease. So I'd like to know, if you're poor and over 65, how quickly are you seen for routine conditions? How quickly are you seen for acute conditions? And then I'd be looking at the situation in other relevant contexts. I'd be looking at alternative systems in Europe and in Canada. And there, of course, we see something not unlike the proposed Medicare for All Act. So I'd be looking at setting up matrices vis-a-vis European countries and Canada. And so, by the way, when I come back up here to this estimate that says, well, you're going to end up spending half of what you're now spending, public and private combined, on healthcare, where does that number come from? Well, we tend to see that over here in Europe and Canada. So now we get also into the question of analogy. You're claiming that the situation in Europe or Canada is analogous to what we would have in a Bernie Sanders centric or a Medicare for all single payer system in the United States. Well, to really hold ground with an opponent, you'd have to go through these matrices, sum it up, present it in an organized, compact fashion before the judge. Can you do it? And to what degree do you need to do this? So is that being promoted? Is this analytical rigor being promoted in the conventional topic analyses to the degree it ought to be? I don't know about that. I do know this: Statesman Debate Institute does promote this kind of analytical rigor, and it does give you tools that you can learn, that you can apply relatively quickly to bring nuance to your efforts, and therefore to be better able to substantiate your case before the judge. But now let me come down to the third point of this particular slide, and that is there's a definite deficiency, I believe, in conventional topic analyses, and that is political advantages and disadvantages, especially deep political advantages and disadvantages, are not getting the attention they need to get. And we're going to spend more on these deficiencies in the next several slides. So when we look at what conventional topical analysis could be doing a better job with, within its self-imposed parameters, we come across two political aspects or issues above all. Now, one has received some attention. That is, there is some discussion in conventional debate circles about the pro-life or pro-choice or the abortion and gender aspects of this resolution. The other has to do, though, with something which has gotten virtually no attention anywhere, and that has to do with the mental health possibilities of the Medicare for All Act introducing medical health screening. Now, what I find interesting about these two political aspects is that we're talking about, and this is the third point I'm making on the slide, we're talking about shades of causation. When we talk about the issues of abortion and gender surgery, say surgery to change a gender from one sex to another, when we talk about those aspects of the Medicaid for All Act, we're talking about straightforward cause and effect. When we're talking about the question of medical health screening being a byproduct of enacting the Medicaid for All Act legislation, we're talking not about causation, direct causation, we're talking about consequence. And that is habitual but not certain effect. That is a probable outcome but not a certain outcome. Let's go into further detail on the next slide. When we're talking about the reproductive and gender issues that are inherent in the proposed legislation, and I should say, by the way, that this legislation is calling for government funding of abortion, which would be the first, this would be unprecedented in American history, and it also calls for government funding of transgender surgery, of changing one sex from one to another, male to female or female to male. So when we look at those aspects of the legislation, it's a clear-cut case. There's definitely a cause and an effect. There's a definite relationship there. If the bill is enacted, then in the absence of judicial intervention, you have guaranteed the elimination of religious liberty and of the religious dimension of the First Amendment to the Constitution. It's just obvious on the face. This, of course, would have an enormous impact. To eliminate religious liberty is to place the state above the church. It's really almost eventually, in effect, to drive the church underground. Now, some may say that's good, and some others will say that's bad, but that's the impact. And how do we say that it has this impact to eliminate religious liberty? Well, I've given you an example here. I've actually cited an article, Healthcare, the Greatest Pro-Life Political Battle of Our Time. And I've given you the link to that article. Now, what we do see in the conventional topical analysis, which is to the credit of the conventional topical analysis, they'll say, well, if you're going to enact this legislation, you're going to get into pro-life, pro-choice arguments. You're going to now go into the pro-life, pro-choice battlefield. Well, yes, you are, but the point I'm trying to make is you're going to go beyond that. You're not tilting toward the pro-choice side in the abortion debate, for instance, or you're not just tilting toward the transgender forces as opposed to the traditional marriage forces. You're actually eliminating a crucial component of the Bill of Rights. And that's a point that is not being made typically in the conventional topical analyses. And that's regrettable. Now, in this slide, I get into another little known, actually virtually unknown aspect of the Medicaid for All Act, and that is the effect it will have on mental health issues. We do know that the legislation is calling for comprehensive, that's the language, comprehensive mental health coverage. They're going to comprehensively fund mental health services. That's the language. But I'm saying, though, that this means also that it's very likely that we're going to be bringing about a national mental health screening system. And what is the impact of that? I don't know. It could be good. It could be very bad. Now, how do we know that by implementing the Medicaid for All Act that we're bringing about mental health screening system? Well, there's no language specifically in the bill about screening or even about early detection of mental diseases. So who am I to say that's probably going to bring about some kind of mental health screening system? Well, we can make the case that this is a consequence. Remember that this is a habitual outcome, not a guaranteed or certain outcome. We can make the case when we begin to look back over the previous 20 years of pronouncements, government pronouncements about mental health. And here you see I've given you 6 developments in the past 20 years. The first one I would draw your attention to, during the first few months really of the Bush administration in 2002, something called the New Freedom Commission on Mental Health published its findings, and this is with the approval of President Bush, and it advocated comprehensive, really nationwide mental health screening for youth and adults alike. Now, in the face of this, there was counteraction, but very ineffectual. And this counteraction has only declined over time. So what happened was Congressman Ron Paul of Texas was very exercised about this, the findings of this commission. He says this is not going to happen. This shall not stand. And he introduced the so-called Parental Consent Act in 2005, 7, 9, and 11. He introduced it in 4 consecutive congressional sessions. And this bill states, if it had been enacted, it was never enacted, and that's in itself interesting, it states that there shall be no mandatory testing, federal government testing of youth unless the parents of the youth consent. So it flies in the face of the Commission's recommendations. But take a look at the number of co-sponsors. Well, for one thing, it didn't even pass, but even more so. Only 44 co-sponsored the bill in 2005, 21 in 2007, 6 in 2009, and 3 in 2011. I'm not counting Ron Paul as the sponsor. I'm talking about the co-sponsors of the bill. So very few people, and then half as many, then even a smaller number, and then half as many of those. Practically no one in the Congress, in the House, in the U.S. House, had anything to do with this Ron Paul Parental Consent Act. So here you have a Republican administration in 2002 saying we should have comprehensive youth and adult screening. And by the way, they would screen the youth in schools and they would screen adults in primary care settings. And here you have almost no opposition being aired from the Congress. Well, then what happens is we see that during the Obama administration that an adjustment was made to the Medicaid language so that Medicaid eligible children are required by federal statute to be tested for mental illness, to be screened. But in reality, it was up to the individual states to decide if they would enforce this screening of youth, of Medicaid eligible youth, and some states have done it and some states have not. We find then that just a few years ago, the so-called Mental Health Act of 2015 was put forth, and about, I think it was 13 U.S. senators, all Democrat, I believe, and about 100 Democrats in the U.S. House put forth this legislative language calling for what President Bush's Commission on Mental Health had called for about 12 years prior. They're calling for comprehensive youth and adult mental health screening. Then in the last few months, one of the Democrat presidential candidates, in this case the former Mayor Bloomberg, openly called for screening of youth and adults by every means possible. Now, he's the only presidential candidate that I believe who called for screening. However, I think you can see the trend here. Incrementally, more of this is being brought into federal law, and more people are pushing for this, and fewer people are opposing this coming about. Until finally I bring you to what Senator Sanders, the principal sponsor of the Medicaid for All Act has to say about it. And he's calling for a massive, comprehensive mental health services. He wants us across the board. Now, it's true that a lot of people who need mental health treatment are not able to receive it. They can't afford it. It's not being offered them. And that's a tragedy. On the other hand, though, there's this call for services, and inside, of course, part and parcel of services you would have to think would be mental health screening. So are we saying, or am I saying, that if you enact the Medicare for All Act that you're going to get a national mental health screening system? I'm not saying that. But it would seem to me, if I look at the history of the last 20 years, that we're moving in a direction where that is increasingly likely to come about, that a screening system would come about. So what's the impact of establishing or instituting a national mental health screening system? Well, the question has to arise. Would the state use this newfound power responsibly or not? Mental health screening was part and parcel of Soviet tyranny, part and parcel of communist Chinese tyranny. The infamous Chinese Red Guard taking you to the re-education camps comes to mind. Those who opposed the Soviet system were considered to be mentally deranged, were screened for this, and were therefore treated accordingly. So there you see, obviously, a harmful outcome here. Of course, there are those who say, no, the outcome, it will never go that way. This is America. This will not come about. This is a democratic system overseeing a mental health screening system. So I've left you with two articles. And one says, yes, you have nothing to fear. In fact, this is a very good outcome. And this is provided by the National Alliance for Mental Illnesses. And then the other is saying, no, absolutely, we need to be fearful of the establishment of such a screening system. And there you can see that particular source. In this slide, I'm going to delve deeper into the question, would the state use a mental health screening system for good or for ill? But first, I have to ask you as a debater, what is your ultimate motivation for engaging in forensics? Is it a short-run motivation, or do you also have a long-run perspective? Are you interested just in winning in the next tournament round, or are you also interested in learning more things about world affairs, which in turn will better position you to be a future responsible leader? And by the way, in the process of taking the long view, you may also come across arguments that the other fellow has never even thought of. It may also give you the element of surprise in competitions. Well, to come back to the question, what would the state do with the mental health screening system? We have to do what Statesman Debate Institute calls increasing or accumulating, building up your strategic knowledge. And strategic knowledge is the Institute's term for learning important things that pertain to our country. So would the state use a mental health screening system for good or for ill? Means that we're going to have to answer the question, well, who is the state? What is this agent that would be wielding this screening system? And we have some possibilities, don't we? Is the state the visible leadership, especially the elected officials? In other words, people who represent you and I. Or is there this sinister deep state? Or is the state, in the final analysis, simply the face of corporate rule? So now I've left you with two citations. One perspective is care of a young lady. She's a socialist. She has an interesting video, and here there you can see it. And she is taking the Marxist position that government is ruled by big business committee, and the big business does not have your interest at heart. And then another perspective is that big business actually could well be and probably is on your side, on the common man and common woman's side, and there's the title of the article, Using Business as a Force for Good is Big Business. And there's one more possibility, that the establishment of a mental health screening system will result in yet another inefficiency, that this is yet another bureaucratic burden that will be imposed upon or would be imposed upon the American people, and that they would have to not only tolerate but also underwrite through their taxes. Now in this slide, I'm getting into that first problem that I have with conventional topical analysis, where this Medicaid for All debate resolution is concerned. And that is that conventional topical analysis is myopic. And by the way, and this is a very important point I would make, this myopia we see not just with healthcare policy debate, we also see this with any public policy debate resolution. I've seen this time and time again. I've seen this year after year after year, and here I see it again, in this case with healthcare policy. And what is that? That debaters are being led to believe that there are fewer options, fewer ways of solving problems than in fact there are. So what we typically, I say we, what my colleagues will offer debaters are limited choices. You either can invoke, and let me erase this now for a moment. You can either invoke the solutions offered by capitalism or by socialism or a mix of capitalism and socialism, when in fact there is a true third way, and it goes by the name of distributism. And believe me, if the negative invokes distributism, they're going to have advantages. In fact, they're probably going to have the element of surprise in this upcoming Medicaid for All debate, whether in scrimmages and especially in tournaments. And by the way, I should say something about looking at capitalism, socialism, or the mix of the two as the only options that the American debater is led to believe exist. If you look at the present American healthcare system, what is offered for those who are 65 and older is essentially socialism. Medicare is basically a socialistic solution. And for those under 65, you're more or less offered a capitalistic solution. So it's a hybrid system, what we have now. What is being offered as an alternative, what the Medicare for All Act is offering now, a universally socialistic solution. But what would what would a system based upon distributism look like? I'm having trouble saying that, aren't I? A distributionistic solution look like? That's a bit of a tongue twister, that label, distributism. What would that look like? What is distributism? Well, let's answer that question in a theoretical way first, and then let's apply it to healthcare. When we encounter the term distributism, surely we think of socialism and communism. We think about the distribution of wealth, that Marxist concept. But in fact, distributism is more than just the distribution of wealth. It's about the distribution of the ownership of production. And we're going to see that distributism is a true third way. If capitalism and socialism are your principal or well-known ways, here's a third way of doing things that's not a mix of the two. So what we're saying is distributism is neither capitalism, nor is it socialism, nor is it a mix. So what is distributism? Well, there is private property in under the distributist system, but there are no workers, at least theoretically. Everybody's an owner or co-owner. You'll find that distributism, capitalism, and socialism all have a state, perhaps a nation state or an empire. But you'll also find, though, that under distributism, you have a diffusion also of political power. Under communism or socialism, you have this acute concentration of political power. Under capitalism, you have this great power of the state, and you also have big business. You have a concentration of wealth and the political power that flows from that. Not so with distributism. There are more checks and balances in the distributistic society than in the other two. Now, at this point, I'd like to digress and make a point about critical thinking and critical thinking instruction in American academia. I don't think it's where it needs to be. I think if there were more critical thinking taking place in our schools and colleges, that students and instructors would have come up with this idea of distributism on their own. There's only so many ways of organizing ownership, and so many ways of organizing, as we're going to see in a moment, a factory. So what about now a way of illustrating distributism? Let's look at this in the concept of factory ownership. So under the capitalist model, we have one way of organizing the ownership of factories. Under socialism, we have another way. In distributism, we have a third way, and they're all very different. So first, under the capitalist model or capitalist system, there is a state and there are privately owned factories. Each factory is usually owned by one person or just several people, and almost everybody else are workers. Under socialism, the state owns the factories. There's no barrier between the state and everyone else. Everyone is a worker. There's no barrier between them and the state. Under distributism, there still is a state, but there's a barrier between the state, as we have in capitalism, but that barrier consists of guilds. These are like the medieval guilds of old. And a guild is a private group of factories. And everyone, theoretically anyway, is a co-owner of a factory. In 20th and 21st century America, we think of Ben and Jerry's. That's like a medieval guild. Almost everybody who is part of Ben and Jerry's is actually a co-owner of Ben and Jerry's. Well, the Ben and Jerry way of organizing businesses is rather unusual, very relatively rare in capitalist systems. Now, having said this about distributism, we've talked about now about a theoretical level and about the degree to which wealth and ownership of production is diffused, to the degree of which there is a concentration of political power. We've even illustrated it with these three different factory models. Let's talk about the history of distributism for a moment. Where does it come from? Well, distributism has a very long pedigree, more than 2,000 years long. In fact, maybe 3,000 years, all told. It goes back, it has Jewish and Christian roots. It goes back to ancient Israel. It was very common in medieval Europe. And it presents you with a perspective on history which clashes with Marxist perspective, to name one. Marx told us that capitalism was preceded by feudalism. Well, was it? Maybe it was preceded by distributism. But that's another discussion, but yet one to be aware of. So now, having looked at distributism at a theoretical level, having given you an illustration of it, having talked about historical roots, and having talked about political philosophy, some political philosophers don't even recognize the existence of distributism. It's now time to apply this concept of distributism, this way of organizing society, to the problem at hand, which is our healthcare debate resolution. And what is that application? Well, you can see it right here. Why not bring together American doctors and dentists and nurses and other medical practitioners and have them form the 21st century equivalent of the medieval guild or guilds? That's what a distributist would argue for. It's virtually unheard of in the American public policy debate, in the American public policy debate circles, and that's a tragedy. But you, as students, as debaters, have an opportunity to explore this and see what good you could make of it. And I've given you here a very fine article. I'm not saying I'm not arguing for or against his solution, but I'm saying it's a well thought out article that applies distributism in general terms to the particulars of the healthcare debate. Here at this moment, I want to dwell upon the key particulars, or at any rate, some of the key particulars of Medale's distributist argument and solution. You're going to notice that he is no ally of socialism nor an ally of the free market system. He's coming at this from a true, fresh perspective. He's going to offer powerful counters, both against the Medicare for All Act and its European variation, thus refuting or negating the resolution. And he's also going to oppose the present U.S. system. So those of you on the negative can invoke these arguments. Those of you on the affirmative need to anticipate such arguments and try to counter them. Now, what about his specifics of his objections? Well, when he talks about the Medicare for All Act, he's very exercised about the cost. 50 million uninsured, so many more partially insured. This will result in a huge increase in demand for healthcare services. And he makes a point that is, I think, gone missing in the present debate. I don't see this being mentioned elsewhere in the public forum circuit. The Europeans are providing universal coverage. They are providing some good benefits, but the cost is disproportionately high than the European governments would otherwise have to pay. That socialism does have that inefficiency and that weakness. He's hinting, of course, at his solution, which would provide quality at lower cost. When he talks about the present U.S. system, he points out that it is neither capitalism nor socialism, yet it has elements of the two. He takes a look at those over 65. He said, yes, at first blush, they seem to be benefiting from a socialistic solution, yet they are competing for services that those under 65 are competing for. The result is to drive up costs even higher than they otherwise would have to be. When he looks at those under 65, he says they think that they are paying for a free market solution. Better innovation, new medical technologies, less wait times in offices, medical offices, and so forth. And yet it's not a free market. It's not competitive. It's a monopolistic system. And he points out the monopolies in the drug companies, the medical professions, and the insurance carriers all enjoy. None of them have incentives to provide lower prices. And then he has something to say about the free market system itself, per se, even if it were employed. And he said the free market system drives or pursues a single factor, the profit motive, to the exclusion of other factors. For instance, providing for those who don't have the means, providing for the high risk part of the population, those who have serious medical illnesses and have trouble finding coverage. Then he offers, though, of course, the balance of his article is to offer a true third way solution. And his solution is nuanced. Again, his solution, if it's coherent, and it seems to be, is something that the negative can wield with great effect. Before I go any further with the particulars of the solution, I would say it does have this disadvantage. It's not heavily quantified. You'd probably have to go. You'd have to go elsewhere in a number of points he's making to find quantification. Go to other articles, other sources, work original sources. But let's now look anyway at the specifics of his distributive solution. Well, he's going to end the drug company monopoly. He's going to replace patents with manufacturing licenses. One of the positive upshots of this is to break up the drug companies into the research and development companies and the manufacturing companies. And that in itself will result in greater competition and lower prices. Then he looks at the monopolies of the medical profession and the insurance carriers, and he does away with both of them too. And he does that by creating guilds. He would suggest that the medical profession form guilds, that is groups of doctors, not one guild, but multiple guilds. So what will happen is the profession now is more accountable than it presently is. And the insurance carriers are now expelled from the equation. The guilds are taking on insurance tasks themselves. That results in a greater efficiency and also greater accountability. One problem we have as a consumer, whether you're, well, especially if you're under 65, is that you cannot distinguish one doctor from another. But you'll be better able to distinguish one guild from another. It's higher profile. Now, the guilds themselves will set their own standards. They'll set prices. Now, that's not what you expect in the free market system. And remember, distributism is not capitalism. The guilds will also issue a far wider range of licenses and provide more services. They'll increase the supply of medical practitioners. He anticipates having all kinds of medical practitioners. You're not going to have the overqualified doctor or dentist doing the simpler tasks that the less educated could do. And he also sees the guilds, as I mentioned before, providing insurance for themselves, for their members, which gives them an incentive to provide high quality at low cost, and also to offer insurance to the rest of us in society. Now, what about the government in his distributive solution? Well, their role is drastically reduced to intervening vis-a-vis the top of the system and the bottom of the system. And you notice that I have put those two words, top and bottom, in quotations. When I'm talking about the top of the system, what I mean is that the government's going to be on the lookout for monopolistic tendencies. And when they show their faces, they're going to be knocked down by the government. When I talk about the bottom of the system, I'm talking about the less well-off, and especially the poor, and also the high-risk carriers, the high-risk patients in the system. In these cases, the government is going to put some pressure upon the guilds, if need be, to make sure the guilds do provide decent insurance coverage of the high risk and of the poor. So I think you'll see that it is a coherent solution. It is a solution that the negative can invoke. Again, the affirmative are going to have problems. We're going to have to come up with a counter to this. It's not a comprehensive argument. There is some quantification that I'd like to see that is not there. But by and large, it's a very powerful article, and certainly one that is going to broaden the mind. In this slide, I sum up what I've been saying to you in this video. And I do so by making use of the metaphor of a mountain. So we have a valley, and we have a plateau, and then we have a mountaintop. And first I need to commend you. You're among the very few among your peers. You're willing to engage in a very arduous intellectual activity to participate in the forensic circuit. More than 99% of your peers are what I would call valley dwellers, ordinary thinkers. They only see one point of view. They see whatever's in the textbook in front of them, whatever's put in front of them must be true. But you know better. And you have learned to ascend to a higher point of view. You've reached a plateau, some distance above the valley. So you're now aware that there's more than one point of view. In fact, there's two or multiple points of view. So you're aware of the liberal point of view versus the conservative, and maybe aware of the gray area between the two. And that's highly commendable. One thing I've tried to point out to you, though, is there are other solutions that you probably had not been aware of. And that's what you find on the mountaintop. Now, Statesman Debate Institute shares with its students all manner of classically based techniques. They're manageable techniques. They're not difficult to learn. That'll make you a better debater at what we're calling the first plateau level. But it will also show you how to ascend, and ascend quickly to the mountaintop, and become a far superior thinker and speaker, and better position you for future leadership. At the same time, we want you to realize that every time you have a debate resolution, you're going to have a new one, in November, a new one in December. These are glorious opportunities to do better here at the first plateau, to hone those skills, and to learn how to ascend to a mountaintop. That each time you have a debate resolution, see that as an opportunity to ascend to another mountaintop. And as you go up all these mountaintops, sometimes foreign policy issues, sometimes domestic policy issues, what's happening? You're getting to the top of this mountain and this mountain and this mountain over here. And the sum of all these the Greek symbol for summation, the sum of all these ascents, if you can get to these mountaintops, is spectacular. Now let's apply this metaphor of a mountain specifically to the debate resolution, to the Medicare debate resolution. So we have the valley, we have the first plateau, we have the mountaintop. Well, here we've noticed that the fight is between the present system, I'll use that as a P, versus the single payer system. But a few of you are aware that there's a moral dimension here, the pro-life, pro-choice matter. Should we fund abortion or not? Should we fund transgender surgery or not? But then a few more realize there's something even above that. There's a question of religious liberty and all the implications, the impact that federal funding of abortion and transgender surgery would have, the far more reaching implications. But I've also tried to make you aware that even above that is the question of a mental health screening system and what that would mean. And then that has gotten into the question of what is the state? Who really controls the state? Who would really benefit from a mental health screening system? Who really benefits from the Medicaid for All Act per se? This is a much broader discussion. Maybe some of this will not find its way into the next debate tournament, but it's important for your own knowledge. It positions you to become a better leader. And yet you've discovered that even above all this is a whole new way of solving problems. Distributism. So down here we have capitalism and socialism and the mix, and yet there's a whole new way of doing things. So I hope this has been a benefit to you. I urge you to think deeper, to look at even more alternatives, to become even a broader and a deeper critical thinker. And something else of great importance, I beseech you, please look back upon the rest of your peers who are not engaged in forensics, participate in forensics activities, and encourage them, persuade them, plead with them to join you. We need more of your peers. We need more good, responsible leaders. Do well in the coming tournaments, and please, by all means, may you turn into a common good-based, truly responsible leader. Indeed, become a statesman or a stateswoman. If you'd like to be trained in the classical method and attain the mountaintop view that I spoke of in the previous slide, then click the link in the description box of this video. And there you'll be taken to our catalog of academic year programs. And here you can see what the catalog looks like. We offer a great range of programs. We have our own online, nationwide, classically based debate league. We offer conventional training, the kind of training you find elsewhere. Having given you that foundation, we then build upon it and give you classical training. We support a great number of formats. You can see what some of them are. We also have our own unique Model UN and Model Congress conferences where you can sharpen your critical thinking skills and learn more about world affairs. We offer AP History coaching, and we also offer thesis coaching. I look forward to seeing you down the road.